We don't handle charity cases." The words sliced through the mahogany-scented air of Morgan and Price Law Associates, each syllable sharp as a blade. The elderly woman's weathered hands trembled on her manila folder, decades of careful savings and dignity crumbling under the attorney's cold stare. Around her, leather chairs worth more than her monthly pension sat empty, while young associates in tailored suits pretended not to notice, their mechanical keyboard clicks a symphony of indifference. In the corner of the reception area, a man in worn jeans and a leather jacket lowered his copy of Texas Monthly. The woman's case was everything wrong with the system, her life savings and home stolen through a fraudulent contract, her desperate search for legal help met with closed doors and empty promises. The senior partner's designer watch caught the afternoon sun as he gestured dismissively, his other hand already reaching for his next client's file. The office's floor-to-ceiling windows showcased downtown Dallas in all its glory, a perfect backdrop for this daily drama of power and privilege. Yet something in the air had shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks. The man in the corner slowly folded his magazine, his movements deliberate, as a Texas drawl cut through the artificial quiet. "Now, what's this about charity cases?" Matthew McConaughey rose from his chair, that familiar, easy smile hiding steel beneath. The typing stopped. Heads turned. The senior partner's face froze mid-dismissal as the Academy Award winner stepped forward, his presence filling the room with something that felt an awful lot like justice about to be served. The silence that followed McConaughey's words hung thick in the air-conditioned perfection of Morgan and Price. The elderly woman, Martha Stevens, as written on her worn folder, clutched her documents closer, years of practiced invisibility warring with a sudden spark of hope. Behind his massive desk, senior partner James Price shifted in his Italian leather chair, his practiced smile faltering as he recalibrated from dismissal to damage control. The celebrity's unannounced presence had shattered the careful choreography of power that normally danced through these halls. Around them, the office's daily rhythm stumbled. Legal assistants found reasons to linger by the copy machine, their phones discreetly shifting to camera mode. Junior associates stood in doorways, drawn by the magnetic pull of unexpected chaos in their ordered world. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Dallas's afternoon sun painted long shadows across the marble floors, like nature itself was drawing battle lines. McConaughey moved with that easy grace that had charmed millions on screen, but there was nothing Hollywood about his expression. His eyes held the same intensity that had won him an Oscar, now focused on something more real than any script, raw injustice playing out in broad daylight. "Mr. McConaughey," Price's voice carried the practiced smoothness of $1,000 consultations, "I wasn't aware you were waiting. We would have been happy to accommodate you immediately." His hands moved to straighten an already perfect tie, that small gesture betraying the calculations running behind his eyes. The moment had become a high-stakes game of reputation management, with Martha Stevens's tragedy reduced to an inconvenient backdrop. But McConaughey wasn't playing. He pulled a chair next to Martha, the simple action somehow making the expensive furniture look more like a living room than a fortress of corporate law. "Tell me about your case, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying that gentle Texas warmth that had won hearts across America. The contrast between his genuine attention and the firm's cold efficiency cut deeper than any scripted courtroom drama. Martha's hands trembled less now as she opened her folder. Around them, the office held its breath, the usual symphony of keyboards and phone calls replaced by the soft rustle of papers and the quiet dignity of a woman finally being heard. Price's smile had frozen into something brittle, like expensive veneer starting to crack under pressure. The power dynamics in the room were shifting, each moment carrying the weight of imminent change. Martha's story unfolded like a map of everything broken in the legal system. 43 years in her small Dallas home. Every mortgage payment made on time from her teacher's salary. Then came the home repair company with their smooth talk and fraudulent contracts, leaving her with empty bank accounts and eviction notices. Her voice cracked only once as she described watching her furniture being carried onto the street. Decades of memories scattered like fallen leaves. McConaughey listened with the kind of attention that couldn't be acted, his jaw tightening at each new detail. The office had gone completely still, Price's earlier dismissal hanging in the air like a damning testimony. Even the junior associates had stopped pretending to work, their faces reflecting uncomfortable recognition of their own possible futures, of choices between justice and billable hours. 3 other law firms already turned me away, Martha concluded, her dignity intact despite everything. Said the case would cost more than it's worth. She smiled apologetically, as if she were the one who should be sorry. McConaughey's expression shifted then, from concerned listener to something more dangerous. The same look that had made him such a compelling force on screen, now focused on the real-world villain sitting behind the expensive desk. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. McConaughey's voice had lost its gentle drawl, replaced by the sharp clarity that had cut through courtroom scenes in A Time to Kill. He stood slowly, his casual demeanor transforming into something that commanded attention. A woman who spent her entire life teaching our children, paying her taxes, following every rule, comes to you for help after being robbed of everything she has, and your response is that justice is too expensive. Price shifted in his chair, the leather creaking like a warning. Mr. McConaughey, while the situation is unfortunate, you have to understand the realities of modern legal practice, the costs of litigation dash. The costs? McConaughey cut him off, his voice carrying that dangerous quiet that had won him his Academy Award. Let's talk about costs, counselor. He gestured around the office, each movement deliberate. This desk, Italian marble, right? Those chairs? Herman Miller, about $2,000 each. That watch you're wearing? Patek Philippe, unless I'm mistaken. Probably worth more than what was stolen from Ms. Stevens. The office had become a theater, every face turned toward this unexpected drama. Junior associates exchanged glances, some hiding smiles, others looking uncomfortable, as their own expensive suits suddenly felt like evidence in a prosecution. Through the windows, the Dallas skyline stood witness, its gleaming towers a monument to the very system being questioned. I've read enough scripts to know the difference between a villain and a hero, McConaughey continued, his words carrying the weight of both Hollywood and hard truth. Right now, counselor, you're on the wrong side of this story. Price stood abruptly, his chair rolling back against the window with a soft thud. With all due respect, Mr. McConaughey, you're an actor. The legal profession has complexities that wouldn't be apparent to someone from entertainment. His tone carried that special condescension reserved for those who dared question the established order. We have to consider billable hours, success rates, firm reputation. Reputation? McConaughey's laugh carried no humor. He pulled out his phone, holding it casually. Let's talk about reputation. Right now, there are... He glanced at the office workers with their not-so-hidden phones. At least dozen people filming this conversation, one social media post about how Morgan & Price throws elderly teachers onto the street, and reputation will be the least of your concerns. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Price's face flushed red, but before he could respond, a young associate stepped forward from the crowd. Sarah Chen, second year at the firm, her Yale law diploma still fresh enough to carry ideals. I'll take the case, she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Pro bono, she turned to Martha, if you'll have me, Ms. Stevens. The ripple effect was immediate. Other associates straightened, some nodding, others finding sudden interest in their shoes. Price's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he watched his carefully maintained control crumble. Through it all, McConaughey's smile grew, not the practiced one from movie posters, but something real and satisfied. "Now that's what justice looks like," he drawled, his hand resting supportively on Martha's shoulder. "Young lawyers remembering why they went to law school in the first place?" Price's composure cracked like thin ice. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying a warning wrapped in silk, "need I remind you that partnership decisions are coming up? Pro bono work isn't a metric we generally consider for advancement." The threat was clear. Careers at Morgan and Price were built on billable hours, not conscience. But something had shifted in the office's atmosphere. Another associate stepped forward, Michael Torres, his Houston accent thick with determination. "I'll second chair." Then Rebecca Goldstein from tax law. "I have experience with real estate fraud cases." One by one, the younger lawyers found their voices, their expensive educations finally aligning with their original aspirations. McConaughey watched it unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen this script before, the moment when people choose principles over prosperity. His presence had become almost secondary to the revolution he'd sparked, exactly as he'd intended. Martha Stevens sat straighter in her chair now, decades of dignity finding its reward. Her eyes glistened as she watched these young lawyers, paid to be mercenaries, choose to be heroes instead. The manila folder in her hands no longer seemed like a beggar's petition, but a battle flag for justice. Price stood behind his desk, power draining from him like water through cupped hands. His carefully maintained world of billing codes and bottom lines was being rewritten in real time. He tried one last time. The firm's resources will be used to serve justice, a new voice boomed. Richard Morgan himself stood in the doorway, the firm's founding partner, looking every bit like the civil rights lawyer he'd been 40 years ago. Or have we forgotten why we hung that equal justice underlaw poster in our lobby? The appearance of Richard Morgan sent a shockwave through the office. At 78, he was semi-retired, more legend than managing partner, his name on the wall a reminder of the firm's nobler beginnings. He moved through the crowded office with the deliberate grace of a judge approaching the bench, his weathered face carrying the gravitas of battles fought for justice long before most of these lawyers were born. Price's expression shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, calculation, fear, and finally a desperate kind of anger. "Richard, the firm's profitability metrics this quarter." "James," Morgan cut him off, his voice carrying decades of courtroom authority, "I didn't spend my youth getting beaten at Selma so we could become accountants with law degrees." He turned to Martha Stevens, his eyes carrying a recognition that transcended class and circumstance. "Ma'am, I believe I knew your late husband, Michael Stevens, taught history at Roosevelt High?" Martha nodded, tears welling. 43 years. "He taught my son," Morgan said softly. "Taught him about justice, about standing up for what's right." He turned to McConaughey, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Though I must admit, I never expected to have an Oscar winner as co-counsel in my last case." McConaughey's eyes lit up. "Your last case, sir?" "Well," Morgan straightened his bow tie, every inch the legendary litigator, "seems to me this firm needs a reminder of why we chose law over banking. Ms. Stevens's case should do nicely for my last argument before retirement." The silence that followed Morgan's declaration had weight, like history holding its breath. Price stood frozen behind his desk, watching his carefully constructed world of profit margins and billable hours crumble before his eyes. But it was Martha Stevens who spoke next, her voice carrying a strength that no eviction notice could touch. "My Michael always said that teaching wasn't about the lessons in books," she said, looking directly at Morgan. "It was about showing children what integrity looks like in action. She turned to the young lawyers gathered around her, like you're all doing right now. McConaughey leaned back, letting the moment play out, understanding that sometimes the best performances aren't performances at all. He watched as Sarah Chen knelt beside Martha's chair, spreading out the case documents with the fierce focus of someone who remembered why they'd endured 3 years of law school. "The fraud pattern is clear," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They've done this to at least 6 other seniors in the area. With the firm's resources, we can not only get Ms. Stevens' home back, but stop them from doing this to anyone else." Morgan nodded, his eyes sweeping the room. "When I started this firm, we had one mission: to make justice accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford it." He fixed Price with a steady gaze. "Somewhere along the way, some of us forgot that. Well, consider this a refresher course in why we became lawyers in the first place." Price's resistance finally shattered, like expensive crystal hitting marble. Perhaps it was the weight of Morgan's disappointment, or the united front of young lawyers standing tall, or simply the recognition that he'd become everything he'd once despised in corporate law. His shoulders slumped, expensive suit suddenly looking more like armor he no longer needed. He began, then stopped, looking around the office as if seeing it for the first time. The pretentious art, the status symbols, the trappings of success that had somehow become chains. "I forgot," he said quietly. "I forgot why I wanted to be a lawyer in the first place." McConaughey stepped forward then, not as a celebrity, but as someone who understood transformation. "That's the thing about remembering who you really are," he drawled, offering his hand to Price. "It's never too late to start doing the right thing." The moment hung in the air like a scene waiting for its cue. Then Price nodded, straightening, not with his usual arrogance, but with something that looked like redemption. "Ms. Stevens," he said, turning to Martha, "I believe we have some wrongs to right, and not just for you." He looked at Sarah Chen. "Pull every case where we turned away someone because they couldn't afford justice. It's time we remembered what that word really means." Morgan's smile carried the weight of vindication. Martha Stevens wiped away tears that were no longer bitter. And through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Dallas sun painted the office in shades of gold, as if nature itself was applauding this return to justice. 2 weeks later, Martha Stevens sat in the same office, but everything had changed. The pretentious art had been replaced with black and white photographs documenting the firm's civil rights history. The Herman Miller chairs still gleamed, but now they held clients from all walks of life, their stories finally being heard. Sarah Chen led the meeting, surrounded by stacks of similar cases they'd uncovered. "The judge froze all their assets," she reported, spreading out the court documents. "Your home will be returned by the end of the week, Ms. Stevens, and the contractors are facing criminal charges." Her Yale law degree now hung beside a new sign on her office door: Pro Bono Division Director. Price sat quietly at the conference table, his designer suit replaced by something more modest, his attention focused on taking notes rather than checking his watch. The transformation in his demeanor spoke louder than any courtroom argument. This was a man who had rediscovered his purpose, his true calling as a defender of justice rather than a counter of billable hours. The story of what happened at Morgan and Price spread through the Dallas legal community like wildfire. Cell phone videos of McConaughey's stand for justice went viral, but it was the aftermath that truly transformed the landscape. 3 other major firms in the city had already announced new pro bono initiatives, their young associates energized by the reminder of law's higher purpose. Morgan himself had become a regular presence again, mentoring the expanding pro bono division with the same passion that had built the firm decades ago. The conference room buzzed with new energy as he shared stories of past civil rights battles, connecting the dots between yesterday's struggles and today's fight for justice. Martha's case had become more than just a victory. It was a blueprint for change. The firm had already taken on 15 similar fraud cases, each one a chance to right wrongs and restore faith in the legal system. Local news stations ran features about the transformation, with Price himself speaking candidly about the importance of remembering why lawyers take their oath in the first place. A month after that fateful afternoon, McConaughey returned to Morgan & Price, this time not to fight for justice, but to witness it in action. The lobby had been transformed, now hosting weekly legal aid clinics where seniors could get free advice about housing issues. Martha Stevens was there too, not as a client, but as a volunteer, helping others navigate the system that had nearly broken her. "You know what my Michael used to say about ripples?" she told McConaughey, as they watched young lawyers earnestly consulting with elderly clients. "That one stone in the right pond can change the whole surface." She smiled, gesturing at Sarah Chen, passionately explaining tenants' rights to a group of seniors. "Look at all these ripples." Price walked past, carrying his own stack of pro bono cases, nodding respectfully to Martha. The expensive watch was gone, replaced by something more modest, but his step had a lightness that no luxury could buy. In the end, it wasn't just about one case or one afternoon. It was about remembering that true justice, like true acting, comes from the heart, and that sometimes the greatest roles we play are the ones where we simply become who we were always meant to be.